I'm going to talk about drug discovery tonight, and thank you for the lights. No, these are not the drugs that we discovered in college. These are drugs that treat disease. Now, there it is. There are lots of diseases. There are actually over 10,000 different diseases, and we have treatments for barely 500 of those. So my work is trying to treat those diseases. That's basically been the focus of my career. Now, it's not those kind of drugs. It's a different type of drug. And now, I've been working on discovering new drugs for almost 28 years. And I'm actually terrible at it. I have, and this is a good example, some data here. I've discovered hundreds of drugs, but most of them crash and burn, either in the animal testing stage or a few make it into the clinic, and those crash and burn as well. My rate of success is like 1%. Can you imagine a civil engineer who's building bridges and 99% of the bridges fall down? I mean, who does that? And is that a business model? Is that actually a business model that you could actually do? It doesn't make any sense. And fortunately, it's not just me. The entire field has this problem. Of 10,000 compounds that are discovered, only 250 make it through animals. And this is testing to make sure that they're not going to kill the first human that takes it. 5 compounds make it through clinical trials. These are a whole series of tests that make sure the compound is safe and make sure that it does what we want it to do, which is treat that disease. 1 gets approved. So it's a huge effort, and it's really a terrible business model. So I'm going to tell you a story that's not going to give you any more confidence that we know what we're doing, okay? It's a success story, but it's not going to help this overall problem. Now, it begins with a small biotech company called Ardea Biosciences. And this company has a compound that they've developed, and it's gone through animals, and it's right at that stage where clinical trials are about to begin. And this compound treats the HIV virus, which is the virus that causes AIDS. Devastating disease. And this compound looks interesting. Like it's not a great compound, but it's a mediocre HIV compound. So it's well worth taking it in and seeing how effective it is. So the story begins at this first phase 1 trial. Now, it looked really good. And so we decided, let's put it in phase 1. A phase 1 trial asks really only one fundamental question. Is the drug safe? If you take it, are you going to die? We don't want that to happen. So we do things to try to avoid that, mostly. So one thing is we start with a very low dose, and that makes good sense. We also use volunteers. And these are people we pay to take drugs. And very often, they're college students. So for a phase 1, we want to monitor the patients or the subjects very carefully. So we start out by taking a blood sample from those patients before we give them anything, right? So we have a baseline. We know, okay, first of all, are they okay to join our study? And second of all, because later, after we give them the drug, then we can take another blood sample and ask, are they still okay? Because they may feel okay, but their liver may be, or their kidney may be, right? So we need to make sure that none of that is going on. Okay. So I'm going to show you some representative data now, and don't be scared, it is a graph. This is data, but it's a big, large graph, and all you need to know is that this is blood before we gave any of the drug, and all of the patient's measurements, and these are a whole series of different measurements. They measure the kidney function, the liver function. It's not important what they are. Just to say they're all in the normal range. And this is great because that means the patient, these guys, are okay to start our study. Now, we give them the drug, and then about 3 hours later, we take another blood sample, and it looks like this. Okay, it looks remarkably similar, right? Yeah, see it before, after. Hey, it looks perfect. We got a drug, right? There's no problems. Of course not. What is that thing in the center, right? Every patient that took this drug had this drop in this small word here. Yes, you can see it. Good, okay. Uric acid. Okay, that sounds awful, doesn't it? Uric acid. Your uric acid is going away. Okay. You can imagine most drug discoverers don't want changes in these fundamental biochemical parameters. You want to keep it, you give the drug, it should treat the virus, not affect the human. Well, it turned out this drug, in every patient that took it, even at the lowest dose we gave, dropped uric acid levels about 80%. Of course, whenever a scientist is faced with a really intractable problem, like what is uric acid and what does it do, right? Every scientist, naturally, you would go to Wikipedia, of course. So we did, and turns out uric acid is it's a waste product. It's a metabolite of DNA and RNA. So if your DNA gets degraded, a piece of uric acid falls out, and it gets excreted. So it's no big deal, right? Turns out, uric acid, I forgot to mention. So this panel that I showed you, this panel of markers, uric acid wasn't even supposed to be on that panel. It's an old panel. It's like the FDA has a list of stuff we're supposed to measure, and we used an old list, and uric acid was on that list. So the new list doesn't even have uric acid on it. It was taken off because it was deemed not really a safety marker, right? It wasn't really involved in safety. So it's like we got this weird result, but it was just luck. So we looked at Wikipedia. Now we know what it does. Now, it turns out that uric acid is the cause of gout. Now, I know that some of you know people who have gout. There's actually 20 million people in the United States alone that have hyperuricemia. So this is high uric acid levels. 8 million have gout. Some people have very high uric acid in their blood. Uric acid is phenomenally insoluble, which means it's like having rocks. And so it just crashes out in your blood. And when it crashes out, it sticks to your joints. And it makes these little rock piles around your joints. And they are incredibly painful. It's probably the most painful joint disease that we know of. So, in these people, it can cause pain, and it can actually get so bad that it disfigures your fingers and toes and knees. High uric acid causes gout. High uric acid causes gout. We just gave this compound, and the uric acid levels dropped by 85%. So you don't need to take my word for it that it's a bad disease. You can take this. This is a Maori woman. She has severe tophaceous gout. She's highly disfigured. You can see the crystals forming on her joints on the CT scan on the right. The only treatment here is to lower her uric acid levels. The only way to get rid of this is to lower your uric acid. And if you do that, those crystals can dissolve, but you have to lower it. And it turns out we have a compound that does exactly that. So the question is, can we use this? Well, it's never as simple as you would like, right? It turns out that the compound we gave, which was Ardea 806 on the left, is not actually the active compound. Turns out that this compound has to pass through the human liver, and it gets clipped right at between the sulfur and the oxygen there, and you end up with another compound that is the active ingredient. So that took a long time to figure out. it turns out that this is the compound that is lowering the uric acid levels. So Ardea had a choice. We could either use a kind of mediocre anti-HIV compound, or we could shift and go into a potentially game-changing gout target. And that's what Ardea did. And this took guts because the investors, they had put a lot of money into the HIV program. We had a whole team of virologists on board. I mean, it was a real difficult shift. But in hindsight, it's probably a good idea. So we went for lesinurad straight up. We bet on it, and we then put a ton of effort into determining a couple things. How does it work? And will it work in a large number of patients? My group took on the task of understanding how it worked. Your kidney filters 50 liters of blood every day. That's an oil drum full, about this tall, every day, unless you drink beer, and then it's actually more. So it's an incredible organ, and it turns out that so your kidney is deciding what to keep. It keeps the glucose, and it gets rid of other things, nitrogenous waste and other things, in your urine. Now, the decisions as to what gets kept and what gets excreted, that's done by these proteins called transporters. And these proteins sit in the membrane, like I've depicted here. See the membrane is the white stuff in the background there. And this transporter actually is like a tube. It has a hole in the center. And stuff goes in or stuff goes out the hole. And you can see I've drawn the yellow on the top is the urine side, and the blood, red on the bottom, is the blood. So in this case, this transporter has one job. Its job is to suck uric acid from the urine and pump it back into the blood. That's all it does. And it just turns out that after 3 or 4 years of work, we determined that lesinurad, that Ardea 594, the compound we have, actually sticks right in the throat of that transporter. Magically, sticks in the throat and blocks the uric acid transport from the urine back into the blood. What that does is more uric acid goes out in the urine, less is in the blood, 80% drop in uric acid levels in the blood. Okay, so that's the mechanism of this compound. Now, that is a key piece of understanding that we had to have in order to be able to tell the FDA, okay, we understand. This is not just magic. We actually understand how it works. So, long story short, let's see. In 2012, the company was acquired by AstraZeneca for this gout compound for $1.3 billion with a B, a total of 7 years. We spent $500 million to develop this thing, 140 employees and 35 contractors. Lesinurad was approved in 2015 for the treatment of hyperuricemia and gout in combination with a xanthine oxidase inhibitor, which is a whole nother story. But the point of this slide is that it takes an incredibly dedicated team to succeed at that kind of thing. It also takes a phenomenal amount of luck, right? We had no idea that uric acid on that panel was going to lead to an entire company. We had no idea that that compound would be clipped in the liver so that it's the right shape to stick in that tiny little transporter in the kidney of humans. We had no idea. So the team at Ardea, it's diverse. They have a huge number of different types of expertise. This is key. I've also been supported by some incredibly talented ladies that kept me on target and dealt with my horrific travel schedule. And at the end of the day, the compound is now available on pharmacy shelves if you care to take some, if you have gout. And the point of the sort of story is that, you can have all the science you want. You have to be able to look at something and look at the potential, not just what you see in front of you. And it's something that I learned at the college, and every day I apply that rule. So, Thank you.